Huh? It must be Gordon on his way back from Vickerstown. Huh? What the... Who in the name of Smokebucks and Pistons are you? It can't be! That's my great-grandfather's engine!
I'm not surprised. I remember you back when you were just a child. Count your lucky stars, boy, for you're not on the wanted list.
Count my lucky stars?
Your grand-grandfather was once a good man, someone who many thought was a friend. But his mistrust ended up costing his life thanks to that engine on the CSW years ago. And do you know why? Because I was that engine!
With the summer season at its end, the arrival of autumn soon made its presence known on the island of Sodor. The engines of the Northwestern Railway were working hard with great pride. However, this particular autumn season had brought some new visitors to the island over from America. The visitors were two engines from the Norfolk and Western. They were David, the sole surviving 2664 Class A, number 1218, and Luis, a restored class of the J locomotives. Along with them came Ariel, a surviving 440 from the Pennsylvania Railroad, Luke, a 210-4 from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and Jason, a replica of a 28884 triplex locomotive from the Erie Railroad. The Fat Controller had given them a special visit to spend the autumn season on the railway, and to allow the public to get their chance to see what these massive locomotives were like in their day. To the engines themselves, they found the people to be among the most amazing and respectful rail fans of all time. Even the Fat Controller's engines agreed with that statement. One evening at the sheds, Rosie, Thomas, Emily, Gordon, and Edward were talking to David, Luis, and Ariel about supernatural stories that had happened on the railway over the years.
Your railroad is full of all kinds of unknown and ghostly things that are full of mysteries.
And not to mention, some are just as scarier as the ones we've encountered back at home in the United States.
You can say that again, Louise.
What's it like over there? None of us have ever been to the railways you run on.
Please tell us.
It ain't like what you have here. The railways in America are much longer and bigger, and we engines can do more work than any others. We pull much heavier passenger and freight trains and can go long distances. But at times we have to let diesels help us out for dynamic braking.
The other engines were impressed.
Is there anything out of the supernatural, like any legends or ghost stories that have been told on the rails?
We've had several, but none of them would ever scare you.
Well, I'll accept the curse of the clinchfield.
Don't bring that up, Louise. She might come here and curse these locos and their railroad.
Who will?
Who's Clinchfield?
What curse?
Oh, now you've gone and done it. We promised to never mention it to the others, or you know what might happen.
The engines looked at each other with curiosity and interest, wanting to know very badly. The 3 American locomotives had no other choice but to tell them.
The engine that comes from this story is legendary and very haunting.
You mean like the untold story of Timothy that we told you about?
You could say that, but this one has been talked about for almost 6 decades, and everyone in America knows about it. Many steam engines and diesels had their own strange and dark tales, but this engine is the mother of all ghost stories on the railroad. Clinchfield 311.
Clinchfield 311?
That doesn't ring any bells to me, for it's an unfamiliar name.
None of you have ever heard of her until now. She was an old 482 mountain-type locomotive built in 1949 serving the Campton Southwestern Railroad. She had been with the company for about 5 months, but her history was very troublesome. She had a bad luck streak. It almost led to her scrapping, but she was sent to work on the Clinchfield. However, it only got worse after arriving in Colorado. 311 was what railroad men called a hoodooed or jinx locomotive, meaning that she was a rolling disaster waiting to happen whether she liked it or not. During her career with the Clinchfield, she had unintentionally injured and killed 20 railroad men, and all because of this jinx. Because of all this, 311 was yanked off the Clinch roster in late 1956 and was placed in an unused storage track in Elkhorn Shop Complex where she awaited her fate. But that was not to be, for she was saved by the manager of the CSW, where he was in search of a large freight locomotive to handle the lumber contract at the time. After lengthy negotiations, the Elkhorn yardmaster finally gave the manager the 311 for free. After that, she was restored to working order and moved out west under her own power. And remarkably, there were no incidents during the 1,369.3-mile cross-country run. For the first time in a long time, 311 had a bright future, now being owned by a railroad that cared about her.
Well, thank goodness she didn't get sent away for scrapping. That's how I lost all my LNEI brothers and sisters. All except one survived, and I know how sad I felt.
What about the other engines who worked there on Clinchfield? Were any of them friends with 311?
Yes, there were. My driver had recently made a discovery 2 months ago before we came here. He was clearing out the yardmaster's desk at the now-closed Irwin, Tennessee yard when he discovered an old picture taken back at Dante, Virginia in 1952. The photo showed engines 311 and 150 sitting outside the Dante roundhouse. It was then that my driver had found out about the relation her and the Pacific locomotive had. Just like the men who distrusted the engine due to the jinx that was hanging on to her, the engines started to do the same thing, and they kept their distance as well, fearing that they too would be jinxed. However, engine 150 was not like them at all and was still 311's closest friend. They first met back in 1950 when 311 arrived on the Clinchfield. They formed a tight bond with each other over time and had been friends ever since that day. Even when the curse was at its worst, 150 was always there for her, even after the CSW had bought her in order to start a new career. You could say the 150 was her light in the darkness that kept her shrouded.
Well, it's good to know that there was someone to be there for her.
So, was 311's bad luck streak over?
It seemed to have been. For the first few weeks of operation, everything went smoothly, but the curse soon made its presence known once again, and that's when almost everyone on the Campton Southwestern Railroad grew into mistrust in 311. She couldn't understand it herself, no matter what. Something was out of her control, and no one could ever tell the real reason. Deep down inside, she was very lonely. Her only real friends were her driver, fireman, and the manager. They did what they could to help 311, but to the others, including the dadgum company's president of CSW, she was a liability that needed to be put down.
Just then Luke came onto the turntable, overhearing the entire conversation.
You're talking about the story of 311?
Yes, we are. Do you know about the story?
Indeed, I do. I remember it very well, and it's very haunting. Though it's intriguing for me to see that you engines of Sodor are so interested in hearing about it.
It's something that we're all into.
What we would really like to know is where in fact does the story of 311 really take place?
The story, ironic as it may seem, takes place on Halloween night, October 31st, 1957. Clinchfield 311 departed the logging camp with a logging train in the mountain and started the down descent. Not long after she left, the weather changed for the worse. It was one of the worst storms in U.S. history, with flash floods being reported everywhere along the line. The Miller River Bridge was the last bridge between the mountain line and the safety of the yard. However, the flash flood had loosened large rocks and trees from the banks, causing them to plummet into the raging rapids below. Since the bridge was made out of wood at the time, the force of the water and debris slowly took out the supports. The speed through the Miller River Canyon was 15 miles per hour at the time, but 311 was running late, so the driver had the throttle open, doing 30 miles per hour down the grade. When they were starting to cross the bridge, its supports finally gave, and it collapsed, taking the train along with its crew into the river below. The following day, a rescue was carried out, and they found total devastation. The location of the wreck hasn't been located, and perhaps never will. 311's remains have not been seen either. It was like she had vanished into thin air. After a new bridge was built, a series of bizarre events soon occurred, and thus the legend of the ghost engine was born. It is said that on Black Wolf Mountain, there lives a spirit, cursing to ride the rails for all eternity, reappearing only once a year on Halloween night, forever doomed to repeat its fate. While it is said to be only a ghost story, the engines of Black Wolf Central will tell you otherwise. Ever since the night of October 31st, 1957, over and over again, once every year, the spirit of 311, otherwise known as the Demon 311, is either heard coming from the mountain or can be seen sitting there, shining her ghostly red headlight at you, and whooshing ghostly red steam, or thundering by where the accident occurred, trying to cross the bridge, but she never reaches the other side.